This Satchidananda, which is not nothing. The body or the permutation of a field of stuff and experience appears, as we've mentioned before, in it. It's not that consciousness or Satchidananda is an extrusion or a symptom of being born. The world appears in it. But I have no memory of it, of the nature of experiencing prior to some vague point in my childhood or infancy. So what was it prior then to what appeared to be the birth or the genesis of my memory? Which is a funny way of saying what's going to happen when I die.
The same thing that's happening now, it'll just look different.
But looking different is very fun. It's vague. It's kind of magical. Because looking different still suggests, the subtle continuity or perturbation of experiencing, regardless of how subtle it may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And maybe it's foolish to ask you because you appear to be still alive. But maybe there's a discovery to be made that speaks to the strangeness of Satchidananda not being nothing. Memory is a symptom of it. It's not dependent upon memory. And yet, prior to my earliest recollection of having memory, I didn't know anything was going on.
Well, you don't remember that you knew anything was going on.
Okay, sure.
It may not have had sufficient continuity that you can reconstitute it in terms of your present frame of reference.
Right.
Or any present frame of reference that has sufficient structure to interpret as being anything.
Yes.
In the sense that a memory does. I mean,
right.
Yesterday's easily recallable because there's certain parameters about eating and being and doing activities that can be related to in terms of the present context of describability or conceivability.
The sense hallucination is fresher, so it seems.
But can you remember what you experienced last night right after you went to sleep before you started dreaming, for example?
Yeah, not well.
Yeah.
I could imagine something, but not well.
Because again, the frame of reference of that quality of experience doesn't compute in terms of the sort of the referentiality that we hold memory in.
Yes.
I mean, memory is very relational.
Yep.
It's relational in terms of various arbitrary parameters, which again, of course, as you say, are supplied by the Satchidananda itself.
Yeah.
So Satchidananda is doing memory, Satchidananda is doing raw experience, Satchidananda is doing the referentiality to the degree there is any, and Satchidananda is also doing the non-referentiality.
Sure.
And there's an enormous amount of non-referentiality that sneaks under the radar, Trojan horse with referentiality.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, you might say, sort of subtle spiritual aspects of phenomena, or multidimensional aspects of phenomena that are not rememberable.
No.
So you can remember an event. Say you had an event yesterday that had just for the sake of argument, that had a high, tingle component, a high, radiant transcendental light component. You can remember the event, and you can remember maybe that it had that, but you can't really recreate that because again, that is intrinsically non-referential.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm saying you can, I'm asserting you can't. I'm assuming you can't.
Yeah.
Because I think again that memory is what we think of as memory is largely related to referentiality, and the vast majority of our experience is doesn't lend itself to referentiality because it's too slippery. It's too.
Right.
I could use the word abstract, but that's not the right word at all. It's too non-referential.
Yep.
It doesn't compute in any terms that can be referred to. It's inconceivable. and it's hard to recall inconceivability. You can maybe recall the fact of inconceivability. That I was having an experience such and such a time that really amazing.
Sticky note on it.
Yeah.
Called inconceivable.
And I think that very much like deep sleep, or very much like sort of even transcendental aspects of more normal experience, it exists outside of referential parameters, and hence is intrinsically real time. It doesn't make sense except in terms of the event itself, which is ultimately true of all event, because all event is, even memory is a bit of a sham. We cook up memory and say, "Oh, I remember this," and it sort of makes sense because I remember that, and now this is happening, and there's some degree of correlation.
Yeah.
But what's happening here is completely inconceivable. Even the normalcy and the referentiality of it is completely inconceivable in actuality. So memory kind of bootstraps itself into a kind of a logic, let's say.
It nudges its way into a field of attention.
Yeah, and has a sort of a pseudo consistency, or a claim to normalcy, or
Right.
it's sort of hard to pin it down.
Sure.
But the fact is that normal experience is exactly as inconceivable as non-referential experience.
Yep.
And the very fact of normalcy, the very fact of referentiality is itself inconceivable. Because again, it's a direct radiance of Satchidananda in Satchidananda, never departing from Satchidananda.
Yep.
So the only actual event is Satchidananda. And the fact that it can look like this, sitting around this room chatting, is inconceivable.
Yes.
In fact.
Yeah, in fact, right. So the notion of waking consciousness, dreaming consciousness, and deep sleep are all remarkably simultaneously present.
Yeah, and they bootstrap themselves up into a kind of a difference and a kind of a seeming structure or seeming coherence, which is literally bootstrapped. It's made up as it goes along, and it seems to be self-verifying as it goes along, based on nothing.
Yes.
Just based on, because it can.
Yeah. Like a dog.
Yeah.
So the subtlety of the deathless is just as deliciously present as what appears to be the continuity of a born life.
Yeah, because this event, the real point is, all these sorts of questions, what's after death, what happens when we sleep, what are dreams like, all these questions can be addressed by simply discovering exactly what's happening right here, right now.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same event, with no shade of difference whatsoever.
Right.
And the fact that it can look as arguably normal or embodied or having continuity and so on, as it does, is just evidence of its inconceivable functionality. It can just churn this shit out without batting an eyelash. But there's nothing here.
Nothing.
All of this seems to be the way it seems to be, as an artifact of what the radiance is. The radiance can seem to be this. The radiance can seem to be what happens in deep sleep. The radiance can seem to be what happens in dreams. The radiance can seem to be God knows what else.
Yeah.
Anything. Who knows?
Right.
But it never departs from the event. There's no quantitative or qualitative difference in the event ever. Now it's always the same thing's happening now, always, exactly, eternally. Beyond space and time. But this is beyond space and time.
Sure.
It seems to be spatial and temporal.
Right.
But that's part of its showing off again.
So if we conjure a notion of before memory or after so-called death of the physical body, that's invariably from the vantage point of a fraction of conceivability, not from the entirety of inconceivability, where the question doesn't really have any relevance.
Yeah, and it's basically sitting on nothing, because conceivability is itself farted into existence out of nothing.
Yeah.
So it's not like there is conceivability and the inconceivable somehow transcends it. Conceivability itself is inconceivable.
Yeah, that's right.
And that it can masquerade as conceivability and continuity.
It can only masquerade as.
Yeah, I mean, that it looks like that and is interpretable as that is astounding.
Yes.
I mean, the power of the Shakti, the power of this radiance is inconceivable. It's literal. I mean, it's beyond inconceivable. It's just, but here it is.
Right, to infinity and beyond.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's macrocosmic or microcosmic, either. Yeah.
Because again, all of that is just more splitting hairs of the radiance. You want to see something seemingly microcosmic, the radiance will churn it up in a second.
You got it.
You want macrocosmic, bang.
Right. Go to the neutrino and then drop through it.
You want space, time, and embodiment, you got it. You want disembodied after death, non-existent light shows, you got it.
Yep. Yeah, you want to rub your nose against the edge of the known universe in an instant, and then look from there.
Yeah,
sure.
But
and that's not appearing spatially. It's not like we start on Earth, go to the edge of the Milky Way, and then keep going out beyond till you finally hit the edge of the edge of the redshift. It's this.
This is what hyperspace looks like.
That's bizarre.
And hyperspace can look like this, and that's intrinsic in its nature that it can do so.
Yeah, great.
And the important point, from a yogic point of view, is this is accessible, it's knowable, it's available, it's right here, right now, and it's actually blatantly obvious. It's not even very artfully. It's not well hidden.
No.
If you actually look at
it's a really shitty job of peekaboo, is what it is.
Yeah, if you actually look at what experience is made of and how it works, it's just completely inconceivable.
Yeah.
Every aspect of it. Time. Change, consciousness. I mean, all these things. What are they? It's just time. Sure, it's time. It's now.
It's a disguise.
It's got to be one soon. It's like,
Exactly.
And yet again, this stuff just bootstraps itself into all of this astounding degree of apparent coherence effortlessly.
Yeah.
Just like flicking a pinky. It's showing off.
Yeah.
Well, then I see that there's kind of a settling in to the reality of what it is, and kind of a stretching out of feeling sense that is different than normal consciousness, and just allowing a little bit more comfort, a tiny degree of greater comfort to be with what is.
Sure.
And then to drop into that, for a short time and then go back out. But just kind of ratcheting into that and not being able to control it.
Sure. Because there's no, the control itself is a fantasy, is a notion. What is happening here and the way it happens and what is doing it and all that, to the extent those are even meaningful issues, is inconceivable. So the notion that there should or could be control or not is all basically, manufactured into existence. It's oversimplified.
But somehow I'm being allowed or being evolved into getting to different levels.
Yeah, lucky you.
You're not complaining, are you?
No.
Okay, just having a little crabby.
Does it seem like I'm related? I'm dumbfoundedly exclaiming.
Good.
Yeah.
That's
Groovy.
good.
But that's what this is. This is all. the very essence of what this is all about is the intrinsic process of reality itself. In other words, reality is already doing itself comprehensively. It's already a done deal. This is reality doing itself. And, the inherent yoga is tuning into that fact and letting reality do itself and appreciating that reality is doing itself comprehensively, which includes the phenomena we call, or may call, spiritual unfoldment. And it seems that when you tune into that fact more and more profoundly, as it is, the actual symptoms of unfoldment also seem to accelerate. And exactly what the correlation is, who knows? But at any rate, it's empirically observable that seems to be so.
So you use the word the symptoms of unfoldment.
Well, unfoldment itself is inconceivable. So we can only talk about the symptoms where we get this, expanded vision and sense of, blah, 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 blah. I mean, however you want to define it or notice it in your own experience. But what it is, who knows? We notice the symptoms, the portions of it we can get some degree of a handle on or even refer to. But the entire thing is, this event here is inconceivable in every aspect, and what it's doing and the way it's doing it and all of that is just completely inconceivable. And all of this yoga, this spirituality, this tuning into it, noticing it, becoming it, or seeing that you are it, and then reaping the rewards thereof, so to speak, is all just this event itself. It's all intrinsically being done. And those are just different ways of looking at it or spin doctoring it. But nonetheless, strangely, it seems that a kind of an active participation in this noticing has profundity. It has, it has some kind of teeth.
I've known for so many years that you just know that you can stretch out with your feelings.
Yeah, sure.
And you can stretch out your feelings in any one of a number of different ways.
Sure.
And then, but, to kind of turn that off and have that kind of ignored or shut down or whatever, and then to kind of reintegrate it little by little, and to see different dimensions just for a little bit. You kind of want to go, yeah, this is kind of cool. Let's do this some more.
Yeah. Sure, yeah. Works for me. Yeah, by all means. I mean, when you begin to discover how astounding this event / process is, obviously it's exciting, it's enlivening, it's stimulating, it's rewarding, it's et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's seductive, it's empowering, it's brings joy, brings liberation, brings greater sense of fullness and completeness and intelligence and blah 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 blah. So sure, of course, it's a no-brainer that when you begin to tune into this stuff, it's sign me up. But the it's not about anything you do. It's really about noticing what this is intrinsically, which is it itself, because it itself is the noticing, because this event is basically a noticing. In other words, you could say this is noticing itself, and that's what is happening here. And so when you notice this on any degree of profundity, you are essentially in its prime mode of it noticing itself, and that seems to resonate, and the magic happens. But it's not anything you're doing or changing so much as noticing the intrinsic event or process that is already occurring. that this intrinsically is, that this inherently is.
I find at times that it's almost as though everyone is participating, whether intentionally or not, in bringing me to see reality as it is. And
Yeah.
I'm doing the same
Yeah.
same time.
Sure.
So, it's very strange.
Very, very strange. I'll see your very and raise you very.
I fold.
Ah, man.
He's into that.
Are these people challenging me with their nonsense, or are they, showing me to look at it? It's like I can't tell at times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is, this event does not have portions where it is more or less pithy or portions where it is more or less relevant. It is intrinsically off the scale in terms of meaningfulness, intelligence, purpose, etc., etc. And of course we can, stumble onto noticing that every once in a while in our thickness and our stupidity.
I think all this stuff actually is really well hidden. I mean, because otherwise I want to go like, holy shit, every time it gets broken through. Now the normalcy gets broken through. It's always surprising. I'm just like, you start talking about it. Oh, it's like getting slapped in the face or something,
But the fact that it seems hidden, and also the fact that you can see through it, is equally strange. I mean, the fact that it seems hidden is it itself is a revelation of its nature. It's not like it's hidden, and then when you see it, it becomes more itself. The hidden it, the stupid it, the thick it is it too. That's one of its major modes. Like we were talking about yesterday, it endlessly generates all these seemings. And the seemings are quite convincing. And yet it can develop sufficient sensitivity within itself to begin to notice that these seemings are not really based on anything and exist in a context which completely transcends any and all of them. Which is when the noticing starts to happen, when the oh wow starts to happen, right? But the fact of these endless seemings is it itself, is its mode. I mean, the fact that it seems so normal, that it seems so pedestrian, that it seems so whatever, right? The normal human situation and so on. The fact that it can do that is blatant, naked revelation. So even the hiding is revelation, because it's revealing its nature of doing that, of playing hide and seek with itself, of spinning off all of these versions and layers of the onion and so on and so forth. Virtual. So everything is direct access. Everything is direct revelation. Even the confusion is direct. Confusion is its very major mode. It is total incoherence. We struggle with that. Oh, I'm so confused. God, nothing makes any sense. No, nothing. Yeah, right. Nothing makes any sense. It's a nail on the head. Confusion's only confusing when you think it's supposed to not be confusing. When you think anything's supposed to make sense.
So Peter, when I heard the last time, which was probably about 6 weeks ago, you spoke about everything being experienced, and something, I heard something there. And since then I've experienced some shift inside, which has never, and I'm not sure these two are related, listening to you on this shift, but the shift is about not experiencing some stuff that I was experiencing, like coming very close, like somebody pushing my buttons very strongly. Somehow, or me thinking that things are not fair, or pity for myself or something.
Uh-huh.
It all kind of evened and went to the level where it's almost equal with other experiences.
Uh-huh.
So nothing really has changed in my circumstances.
Right.
If anything, there's some bad stuff, things happening. But somehow, and I don't know if it's a permanent shift or not, and I have been coming close to getting, triggered by those buttons.
Mm-hmm, sure.
But I never went back, really, in the last month. And this is amazing to me.
Sure.
Exactly the same. I do exactly the same stuff, but I experience it as one of many things, and almost don't choose to react as strongly as I was because why?
Well, events.
And I'm amazed at that.
Yeah. Events seem to have importance in themselves because we are, in our minds, in our interpretation, generally unconsciously, supplying them with importance, supplying them with, no, this is objective, this matters, this has consequence, this is chains of events that are going on, they matter, and because we have a sense that they matter and they're important, then we have an investment in them that brings a corresponding vulnerability and emotional reactivity and so on. Because if something matters, then you're engaged with it. It matters. But when you begin to see, and it's not that nothing matters, but when you begin to see that the actual situation of experience is experience itself, and that we supply the objectivity within experience. Experience isn't telling us it's objective. Just like in a dream. In a dream, you may, typically we're dreaming, if we're just dreaming normally, we're holding the dream to be a real event. Maybe we're talking to somebody or we're doing something that we may feel like we have to do, whatever, in the dream. But again, if you've ever had lucid dream, you know that it's possible to be with a dream and see, oh, this is not an objective event. This is just an experience. And all of a sudden the importance level, the seeming importance level of the events that seem to be happening drops way down or disappears altogether, right?
Yeah.
Because you see that, oh, there's nothing really at stake here. There is nothing that really matters here. These events are just, patterns of apparent phenomena that have no implication. And likewise, what's going on here is very similar. And particularly in the sense that the seeming importance of things that makes us emotionally reactive, we supply with our psychology. It's not actually in the events themselves. And so when you begin to shift from experiencing events just credulously as if it was just objectively and true and everything is at face value and so on and so forth, then things seem to be some way. But when you begin to get that, so what's going on here is more subtle than that. There's something interesting going on here. This experience itself, and there's energies and so on and so forth. It provokes a shift in the importance of the way we relate to the experiences and events in our lives. And it certainly shows up in terms of, your reactivity, your emotional vulnerability, and all these kinds of things, because you don't care so much because you realize that there's not really that much at stake compared to if you're just taking everything for granted as being objectively true and no questions asked. Then things may seem to be very important. Like, for example, in politics, it's very easy to get worked up about politics. If you thought the world was actual, people would be out there carrying guns, and many are, of course. Not so much in this country, I guess, but at least not openly. But then, it's also possible to see, this is a crazy system playing itself out, and there's not that much at stake here. And all of a sudden, the urgency or importance it seems to have deflates. And so likewise, the way that we relate to our experience can change largely depending on subjective factors, because we supply the urgency or the importance that circumstances seem to have, and that's variable because it depends upon how we're relating to our experience.
Yeah, what I wanted to say is, for me, the shift happened in the way that I don't have this instant reaction. You know, previously I had this instant reaction. If somebody sits me down and tells me that it's all not very important, I would probably agree. So on a mental level, I would, but it never applied to me. And you know, I had cases where it didn't come to 10 and acted out of that. And somehow that has changed. There is this instant reaction, but it's so much slower, so much smaller.
Because we hold these things unconsciously. We don't hold them in our conscious mind. It's not something we think, or a philosophy we have holding, or an idea we have that we can argue with or question and so on. These things we hold them unconsciously, so we don't even know. We take them to be true unquestionably. And they're not amenable to logic. Even if you really come to a different understanding sort of philosophically or in your thoughts, it doesn't necessarily affect the way you're holding it, because it's like, I mean, the way I put it, it's the way you're holding yourself in your energy. And psychologically speaking, you could say you're holding it subconsciously or unconsciously. And the trick is to address, I mean, that's what all the spiritual work is about. This is not about conscious ideas. This is about discovering how to shift your own energy in terms of where you are with it. And the process of doing that is subtle and strange, and it's not logical. So it looks like we're sitting around here talking about ideas and stuff, but in actuality there's other things going on, and being directly immersed in that way of being with experience can be provocative, can have an effect, and ultimately we can stumble on to how to, let's just call it how to reorient ourselves in relation to our energy in a more integrated fashion, in a more empowered fashion.
I still don't know how it happens though.
No, it makes no sense. It's irrational. There's no way. It can't be analyzed.
I would say that it's the less reactivity is the diminishing, the experience of diminishing self-importance, or that there's anything that can be damaged or confronted, and so it's almost as there's a diminishment of notion of individual self as being more important than whatever else is appearing in experience itself. So
yes, I mean, it's all that. It's just having a worldview where you're important, the world's important, circumstances are important, it matters, you have to do stuff about stuff, as opposed to a worldview where this is natural. I'm a part of this.
right.
What's doing me is doing this. It's all unfolding. It's all essentially out of control. Anyway, it's doing itself.
Right. Well, that's
and
what I was
all of those. I agree with you. All of those kinds of notions affect this kind of a shift where there is less self-importance, less holding of, less self-centeredness, less holding oneself as separate from the world. There's me and there's the world, and I'm in the world and I have to do something about it. And there's more of everything becomes much more permeable and integrated. A tendency in that direction anyway, which definitely changes the way our experience feels and the way we function in a lot of obvious ways. Certainly reactivity is one of them.
But more importantly, I think what I was trying to say here is that we begin to see, just like in a dream, when we see ourselves in a dream, that we're not supplying emotion to a reaction. We are not. There's no we to begin with. We begin to see that it's this we've been taking ourselves to be, or that has been being experienced as something we're taking ourselves to be. Is itself a phantom. It's a dream, like everything else.
Oh, I love it. Decaf today? Extra Jagger?
Yeah.
Extra.
This is like baby steps in that regard, where I'm dreading something's going to happen at work, that I got to face some kind of crappy student
Right.
And then I start paying attention. I dread, but I start paying attention when I get to work, how different it is than I think it's going to go. And all of a sudden I just start noticing there's birds out in the yard, and it's really astoundingly different than how I thought it was going to go. Almost always. And
that's a really good technique for noticing, is noticing that the absolute uniqueness and surprising quality of the circumstances of every instant. What seems to happen at any instant is completely unpredictable and entirely unexpected, not just in little ways, but in huge ways. Always, not like sometimes and once in a while, but like always. This is intrinsic in the circumstances, the apparent circumstances of the present moment, that they are entirely spontaneous, entirely unpredictable, entirely surprising, and entirely meaningful. They will convey just vast quantities of unexpected information and revelation and input from all over the place. Thanks. And that's always that's just a fact of the nature of experience. And since that is always the case, noticing that immediately takes you out of this narrative expectation of continuity of events and what's going to happen and what did happen and what I think and what they think and blah blah blah, and deposits you in spontaneity where all bets are off, and instant noticing. All of a sudden you are less in the habitual framework of interpretation and more in actuality, which of course is this moment always is. This moment is always actuality.
It's almost an advantage to have, like, I have a route that I have to take to work. It's almost an advantage to have that kind of repetition, so that I can start going, okay, well, the sun's never glinted off the car like that before. I don't think that car's ever been beside me before. I mean, it's like
it's always
completely,
completely unique. I mean, I've said this, you've probably heard me, I've said this dozens and dozens and let's say hundreds of times, but, it's a very, very simple yogic experiment to discover what experience is. To sit in front of a blank wall that's well lit, don't move, don't change anything, try and make everything as motionless and stable as possible, and sit with your eyes open and stare at the wall. Mm-hmm. Lo and behold, you will notice you do not have the same experience ever. Everything changes every instant. And this just demonstrates very explicitly that the spontaneity of experience does not depend upon so-called circumstances. And circumstances themselves, as experience, are always wildly spontaneous. A blank wall will show you that, how much more a changing environment with all sorts of things showing up, moving past and so on and so forth.
What is a shift like that, though? If everything is experience and everything comes at you, and one day you start experiencing things differently and don't get as upset and angry and just take things in, what is a shift?
It can't be said. It can't be said what it is.
It's something that feels real, and yet I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's real. It's absolutely real. I mean, and a sure sign of reality is that you can't talk about it. When you can talk about it, then that it indicates that you are dealing with something that is describable, conceivable, that makes some kind of sense or has some degree of logic to it.
I have no desire to explain it either.
Yeah, sure. But that's just as well, because it's unexplainable. But the important thing is not to describe it. The important thing is to notice it, and the more you notice it, the more it is integrated into your life, and the more you get to take advantage of its characteristics, which proves to be extremely valuable to us in terms of sense of freedom, a sense of fullness, a sense of independence, a sense of empowerment, a sense of relative invulnerability, having no just invulnerability is a good one. And we discover these things, they don't make any sense, but nonetheless, by just noticing this whole irrational but actual quality of experience, all of this begins to unfold itself more and more actively, more and more dynamically. and again, you never will be able to get a handle on it or say what it is, but it is self-evident, self-verifying that this is something. And as always, the foot in the door is so easy. Just notice anything whatsoever in your experience that you don't have a handle on. That's all. Anywhere, anytime, just anything. Some tiny little thing, the glint of light off something that's reflecting, or some sound that suddenly, the chirping of a bird suddenly, or something. Just anything, and then the race is on.
And then you realize you don't have a handle on anything.
Yeah, of course, because that opens your awareness to the revelation of what this actually is, to whatever degree you can access it, you can access it depending upon your current sort of frames of reference and stuff. But it doesn't matter how much you do it. Just a little bit is fine, because it's like popping a balloon. You don't need to make a very big hole. Like a little needle point will do the trick.
So what do you think of choice then?
Well, choice is inconceivable. You can't say what it is, you can't say how it works, you can't say if it works, you can't say if it's anything. It's like anything, really. It's mysterious.
Seems like we have a choice of having this reactivity or not. And like reacting to things and getting all upset and worked up is a choice that we are free not to take.
Well, it may or may not be a choice.
I don't know.
The most powerful shifts happen intrinsically rather than by design or by intention. In other words, we may be able to influence our behavior by, trying to, by planning to, by exercising various things, by saying certain things to ourselves, by doing certain things, whatever. But the most powerful transformations in how we relate to our experience come sort of from as groundswells from underneath, rather than as intention from by
when
design.
you get to the space, though, something happens, and to you, before you had no choice, and now it looks like you have a choice to jump on it or not. You can choose to let it pass by, but before you get to this space inside, there is no choice.
Right, but getting to that space is the thing that I'm talking about, and when that happens, that maybe can happen even more profoundly. It's not necessarily the end of the line. It may be that there's more, the journey of moving into different spaces, each of which has different properties and different degrees of disentanglement from our ordinary stuck view of our lives and being in our lives problematically the way we may.
Saying that we have choice about something is just a way of saying that we have conscious access to our supposed personal influence in that circumstance, which is in itself is neither here nor there.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Well, choice can also be a type of a shift in responsiveness, noticing that the responsiveness is new in each moment. It's like the spontaneous responsiveness of things, which may feel different from the activity, too.
Sure. What choice is, what anything is ultimately inconceivable and unknowable and transcendental. but all of these things can seem to be very different things as we
Right.
navigate through the different potential spaces that we move through in the process of unfoldment.
Like I had an experience yesterday where I took someone in a pretty desperate situation to a rehab, and it was a process of hours of unfolding. But then there was this point where I knew we weren't going to get in the car unless I chose that it was okay whatever she did in the car. I was like, just take it in the car, let's go. And I felt like at that moment I made a choice, and there could be consequences and ramifications. But it was like, I said something that was like, it seemed like a choice.
Yeah, it seems like a choice, but then why did you make that choice? Why didn't you make another choice? Where did that come from?
Right. And to my mind, I thought it was because it was the only way to get there.
Right.
I told myself, we won't get there unless
Yeah, but why did you tell yourself that? Where did that come from?
Observation of the prior 4 hours.
Right. But why did you draw the conclusions that you drew based on that observation? Maybe someone else would have drawn some other conclusions. In other words, there's always an irrational, transcendental factor in all event. Ultimately, nothing but always discoverably, even when things can seem to be sort of, well, it makes sense. We got to do this, so let's do it, kind of thing. But really, where things come from is ultimately mysterious, and noticing that is profoundly valuable. So again, the whole thing with choice. Choice is fine. By all means, make choices. Why not? It's great fun. But you have the opportunity to notice when you're making a choice that something else is going on too, and you're calling it a choice. Or you might say, I had no choice. Okay, fine, call it you had no choice. But in either case, where did that come from? Where is it happening? What context is it happening in? What's it made of? How's it appearing? How's it disappearing? How's it going?
Well, we can make the choices that we can make in the moment. And we can't really make any other choices because in my business right now, things are going at a level like I've wanted to have them go for years. And if I had a choice, I had to go this way many years ago. But I just wasn't there. It just wasn't there to happen. It wasn't. It was an impossible thing to have happen until now that it's happening.
Right. So where does that there-ness come from?
Yeah, where does that come from? At all.
Yeah.
And it comes from the thing that I'm not in control of, that's for sure. It's happening.
Well, but are you, to say I'm not in control of it is another meaningless statement. Whatever control you have is its control, and whatever out of control you have is its control. Or maybe it's out of control. Who knows? But the point is that
it comes when it comes.
And nothing but. It's not like it's never not coming, but it comes as it comes. And there's no way to get a handle on what that is. You can't say what it's doing. You can't even say what it's done. You can sort of say, well, gosh, that really got me in a place that's, this is kind of a nice place to be. It's like, well, yeah, it says you. But you can't say what is actually happening in any situation, because you can't say where it comes from, you can't say how it got there, you can't say what it consists of, you can't say where it's going. In actuality, you can, by oversimplifying and just making up an interpretation, but that interpretation will be a partialization. Because it will omit so much that is unsayable, that is unconceivable, and yet which is self-evidently always a part of, a part of event.
So the seeming flow is just a seeming flow.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Everything is just a seeming.
And you are it. Okay?
And what it actually is, and even what it seems to be, is completely inconceivable.
It's really what?
Inconceivable. You can't get a handle on it. You can't get a handle on anything. The capital A. So you can't know what's happening, you can't know what happened, you can't know what's going to happen, you can't know if anything's happening, you can't know why it's happening, you can't know where it's happening, you can't know how it's happening, you can't know what it's made of, you can't know how it's being experienced, you can't know any of that stuff in actuality. And so anytime you find yourself saying or asserting filling in any of those blanks, you're doing so just by bravado. Which is fine, but just notice the fact. Notice the fact of the actual openness of the circumstance, and how everything always transcends how you're holding it to be, no matter how sophisticatedly and elaborately you're holding it to be. The event always transcends that inconceivably. I mean, to an inconceivable degree.
That's the outwardness, feelingness that I was kind of talking about before. I was experiencing it.
Sure.
There's so much beyond
Sure.
what I have normally come to know as being alive.
Sure. Yeah. And noticing that fact is noticing, and noticing gives you access to that, and it ramps itself up and starts taking off exponentially. With no end in sight.
So two things. One, just for a second, going back to the choice thing. One of the things that I feel is that everything is so hard to articulate around you. But when I
notice.
the word comes out, and no,
that's not the word.
That's okay.
And it doesn't matter what you say.
It doesn't matter what I say. It's what it does.
That's right.
That's because I'm aware as it's coming out. That should possibly be it.
Give it up.
Park it.
I'll take anything.
That at the point when I realized or observed that the people around me didn't have choice to act the way they were acting to do, it became obvious to me that nobody woke up in the morning and said, "Oh, I'm going to be mean to people today." You know, and I don't know.
Well put.
And yet they were. And so I kind of just didn't have. There was no choice. They didn't have that. And then I start to go, so no, I didn't do I, but I still have these outbursts, or I still do these things, and so, I did a couple this morning, and I was like, ugh, I'm not proud of that, and yet here I am with it, and it always has this feeling of consequences. So that's one line of questioning, but I have one other, which.
And it's doing itself.
So there's no consequences then, even.
Well, there may or may not be consequence, but it's inconceivable. So even if there were, you couldn't possibly get a handle on them, because you can't know what's actually happening. So you obviously can't know where it's going to lead to, because any interpretation you have about what happens or is happening or happens in an event is a vast oversimplification. Because all event, i.e. this event, is inconceivable in its scope, in its factors, and there's no way to get a handle on it or interpret it accurately.
So then but I can guess, which is much like I can have a choice. It's like you can play.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we do.
Guess.
We do. Our minds do oversimplify, but the oversimplification is drastic. Like drastic. Like I wonder what Washington D.C. is like, and so you land on a street corner and you see an ant and you look at the ant and you go, oh, now I know what Washington D.C. is like. Yeah, watching you see is like the ant, but you're oversimplifying a bit. That's kind of what we do with our experience. I mean, even when we have all these vast, elaborate worldviews and explanations and very sophisticated ideas of what's going on here, it's just like that ant. Because what's really going on here is like, just off the charts and off the off, and et cetera, et cetera.
But then there's the view thing, right?
Yeah, that is the view.
No, but you're talking about, a couple meetings ago, you were talking about the yogic view or the right
The view.
the view.
The view.
The view.
With a big V.
Yes.
The Dzogchen view.
And so, what was it? Yeah, I mean, so isn't there, like more or less productive or accurate or simplifications?
No.
Well, what about the view?
The view is not a simplification.
No, it's not
It's not simple.
This is the view.
It's
Yeah.
not simple, and it's not any of those.
The view is infinite openness.
Even conceivable.
And infinite openness is not limited because it builds on itself forever exponentially.
Yeah, but you were saying something else before.
Oh, he lies.
Sorry.
That's the big picture.
Well, there's a lot of ways to put infinite openness. In fact, anything. No. In fact, anything you say is a way of putting infinite openness.
Right, everything's
Anything
true.
you say. I mean, this glass of water is a way of saying
They're all
infinite
inaccurate.
openness, because that's what this is. A glass of water is a name for infinite openness. The view is infinite openness. How many ways can it be put? As many ways as you want. But the question is to see the actuality, not to dwell on labels and tags and definitions. This is actual right here. And this is what matters. This is the view. And ways of putting it exist within it and consist of it and indicate it. Right? In other words, anything you talk about will indicate something in experience, and something in experience is experience, and so embodies all the characteristics of experience, i.e., in this case, infinite openness. So you start talking about a glass of water, that's the view. But you have to see it as it is. And you don't see it as it is through ideas. You see it as it is right here.
Even though the stuff that you're kind of bringing up right now is giving me ideas about it, but the ideas about it aren't what the isness of it is.
Well, they are, because the ideas are it. The ideas are its isness. But they aren't
A full picture of the isness.
they are the isness. The isness is, because the isness is infinite openness, it is not even a full picture of itself. Someone got that.
Yeah.
So, in other words, any version of it is it, and is a partial version of it,
As well as
which is very paradoxical. But that's the way this works. That's what you get when you got it to start with infinite openness.
So it's also a complete view of it.
Yeah, complete. Oh yeah.
Complete view. It's not
Yeah.
The part is the whole is the part. The whole transcends each and all of its parts.
more than one heckler.
And if that doesn't make any sense, take it up with management.
The oversimplification. The oversimplification. Then it's not the boogeyman.
No, that's it. Oversimplification is it. It's one of its major modes.
It's just yeah.
But from a yogic point of view, you want to see it.
You want to see that.
Everything is fine. Everything is reality, but see what it is.
Right.
And that's where noticing fits in. It's not about... Because noticing reveals context.
Right.
And context shows you what things are.
That's good.
Huh.
Context.
Context.
Explain that. Makes sense.
That's a slippery path.
Well, of course it's slippery. It's all slippery.
So
So when you go say, okay, you can't know anything, anytime, any place, anything that's happened, other than, and so it's can't know. What about? And you may have answered this 100 times, but I'm pretty new to this frame. But what about sort of that deep knowing? That knowing. Because when you say that, I found myself when you go, you can't know anything, any place, anything.
What you can't know.
Yes.
It's a problem of words that are most useful here.
Yeah.
Okay, I would say you can't know, but you can participate. And that deep knowing, I would call. Let's not call it a knowing. Let's call that a participation. Let's call it an energetic participation. Say, if you get New Agey. So you can't sit and figure out something. You can't sit down with a pencil and paper and write something that is going to be true. And yet, you can participate with events more profoundly than that, directly, in a way that can feel participatory, can feel like following choices, can feel like embarking on adventures, and so on and so forth. And they're ultimately the same thing. It's just a matter of degree of profundity.
Yeah, I mean that's what my experience is that it's sort of I'm connected to just something like when you talk, or there's certain concepts you say where I'm like, I recognize that.
Yeah.
It's like I resonate
Yeah,
with that because
exactly.
I know it, because I know
Right.
it, and then where's
Yeah.
the same,
Because at that point you transcend the words and you go to direct experience as a recognition, which puts you in participation, because you're participating with the energetic. It's called the energetic reality, rather than being with it conceptually or rationally. And it can all be one system. It's not like there's a necessary disjunct between words and more deep participation, but it's a slippery slope.
Because it's all once, even this whole, that same knowing.
So, yeah, sure, of course. Why don't we have a little 5 or 10 minute break?
Yeah.
Good idea.
It's dessert time again.
I'll go back online and
Chat time.
there we go.
What?
Were there many people?
No, nobody. I mean, one person said hello, Abel. Who that is?
Adele?
Abel, A-D-E-L-L-E. I don't know who that is. But, no. Probably, it is, I don't know, maybe people didn't know. A lot of people don't check the invitation calendar, they're not on it. So, how would they know? And the other client, Jeff's here, so.
Look at this. Everything got normal over the break.
Did it?
Normal?
I know. It's I know. I know. I always get one. Oh, I see. That's right. Yeah. One has like a propensity to overeat or drink a lot, whatever it is, and I recognize that it would never be the same. But how? I'm not articulating my question, and I guess it's like I'm wondering when someone keeps seemingly is responding to something in much the same way. But I know from what you're going to say, there is never the same, and yet when you see someone every day, do something during the course. time, it's like as a response to whatever. I just,
Then what?
I guess that's just it. It doesn't seems to matter, and yet I don't know what that means.
Well, everything matters, but what matters is that everything be exactly what it is. If it needed to be different, it would be. And it is.
And since we answered the question before about choice, I guess, prior to this, I was under the assumption that they're making a choice to respond in a certain way to whatever they're experiencing.
The choice you make is a reflection of who you are at that moment. And you don't have a choice to be who you are at the moment. And who you are at the moment is part and parcel of your path of unfoldment. So it's imperative, and there's no alternative, so conveniently enough, that you be who you are in the moment, which of course will lead to you making the choices that a person like you that you happen to be at that moment would make in that situation as they're interpreting it in that moment. And all of that is intrinsically the path of unfoldment. Because again, this is doing itself. It doesn't need to be corrected. It's not doing it wrong. It's not doing it badly. It's doing it inconceivably and flawlessly. And its methods are inconceivable and unanalyzable and vastly different than any interpretation we may have of them. Again, our interpretation of what's happening and what someone's doing and what the choices they're making, again, is kind of like the ants in Washington, D.C. again. Because what's actually happening is like the iceberg, infinity to the infinite power of it is beneath the surface inscrutable, and there's a little tiny corner showing that is what it seems to be.
So the concept of, that we think we're analyzing it or judging it is even that too.
Yeah,
it's almost
totally.
Small point.
Yeah, you can't possibly get a handle on what's happening. And of course how it should be and all these other things. And yet all of that procedure is the path of unfoldment. So people interacting and people doing and interventions and all this stuff is exactly the mechanism that reality needs to learn to see itself better. Or let's say, learn to see itself better as an arbitrary. It's kind of what it's doing. Maybe it's trying to learn to see itself less well.
I think the ant in Washington actually is probably more accurate than a lot of other views of Washington. Because otherwise, there's a bunch of assholes over there trying to think they're important and running everything. And so I can kind of okay, I can get rid of that idea and just notice it's here. Okay. That would take me out of the assholes in Washington.
Works for me.
It works for you?
Do it.
So, Peter, I read in your book somewhere, one of those self-help books, that suggested when somebody does something that makes you upset, to see it in a way that they do not have a choice, that in that moment who they are, they do not have a choice about what they do. And if you perceive other people like that, they will not be getting you upset because they couldn't do otherwise. You imagine that they would be coming from your values or where you are, but they're not.
Of course.
They're seeing things in their own way, and that's the only thing they could do at the moment. So
of course.
What do you think about that statement? It's true, right?
Relatively.
But then it'd be true about you too. Even if you reacted to them, you don't have a choice about reacting to them the way you do. Whether you are calling it...
Here is where the theory kind of breaks. Now what do you do with that? You don't have a choice either. And
You forgive yourself just like you forgive them. There's no
Why not?
difference.
Why not?
Or not. Mostly not.
Or pay attention to the ant in Washington.
Well, it's oversimplification. I think that's what the bottom line is.
I tried to explain it to a number of people. I couldn't convince anybody to take others this way, but they
couldn't
have
help
no
it.
choice. They have no choice. Why are they being whatever.
To play devil's advocate, what about this soldier who went into houses and killed children and things? Did he not have a choice not to pull the trigger at any one time?
Exactly.
Apparently
He
not.
didn't.
Of course not. He was nuts.
Well,
But
nobody
whereas
benefit.
he was,
Nope, there wouldn't be any need for jails if the defense was always he was nuts.
No, nuts people need to be in jail so they don't hurt us.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it's a
Wouldn't
little,
that be nice?
Sometimes.
it's a little bit difficult to go down this road because, again, you have to understand what choice actually is. To say someone has a choice or not a choice, we have to investigate what choice is. And I'm not answering that. But,
Well,
You
all
know.
it means of this sentence is that you may think they're doing something wrong.
exactly, it comes more to right. Choice can
Right.
be right or wrong.
But
Yeah.
you're coming from a position that's outside of them and has nothing to do with them, in a way.
When you noticed that you didn't react to something, that you remembered that another similar circumstance you did react to, you at that moment you didn't react to it. I don't know if you had a choice. You just did not do it. You noticed that. So is that a choice? And it doesn't seem to matter. Could you, if you then found yourself reacting to something like that was so very similar, would that be then you chose that, or would that just be what you noticed?
Is there such a thing as not reacting?
Well, I think the first thing would be to see who is this you that you think that you are, or that they are. What? How do you define it to begin with? It's impossible, you know. They're an experience in your very beingness,
Yeah.
and that's it. I mean, I can't imagine trying to say anything more about it, and that's just how they appear.
Well, we're all coming from this situation where we have these constructed ideas of personhood that keep bumping up against the fact of inconceivable infinite openness. And so there sometimes arise these ways in which we try to affirm our existence as a person, you know, compulsive behaviors.
Right.
And it's a kind of bumpiness in the unfolding. It can show up in various ways as violent behavior, as compulsive behavior. But it's the person dealing with the fact.
And then it's people, places, and things which don't exist.
I'm finding one more, like when I heard about the guy who shot at all those people, it's like, I used to go, God, what a sick person. Now I'm more these days, because I'm sure glad I didn't do that. Never put 20 years of God, go I. No.
You're glad that wasn't your role to play a big puzzle.
It's like, jeez Louise.
I say that almost every day, a dozen times.
Yeah, me too. And as I was sure when I went to, and I'll be going again to San Quentin, and it was like I was astounded at how close I felt to all those people.
So Peter, this is sort of changing the subject, but it seems that I can experience the inconceivable. I mean, that doesn't make sense. But
I'm just wondering what's happening there. I mean,
It's impossible to experience the conceivable.
yeah.
You experience nothing but the inconceivable.
There. Okay. Yeah.
Or we conceive of it as things, or it conceives itself as things.
But usually, I guess it's just what we always talk about. I can experience myself having a thought about something, or describing something, or labeling something. But I can also experience when none of that happens.
Yeah. And even when that's happening, none of that is also happening. Because if you're having a thought, that's happening in an extremely small portion of your experience, and the rest of your experience is full of non-thought experience.
Yeah.
Let's say. So and having a thought is itself inconceivable. And thinking that it has anything, thinking that it's referential at all is inconceivable.
Yeah.
So you're always experiencing the inconceivable.
And I think last week I talked a little bit about how I seemed I was having both kind of experiences at the same time, which was really odd. And it was...
well, you always are. You always are.
Well, I was experiencing sort of the inconceivable, or just undescribable. I was just no place. But there was also thought and other things going on.
That's always the case, isn't it? I mean, you're
but
usually
aware of it. Yeah, but usually I'm experiencing one at a time. I mean,
well, you may be noticing.
That's not the word. No, experience is the wrong word. I was aware. It seemed I was aware of both.
Yeah.
Usually I'm only aware of one.
But is that really true? Or maybe you're defining your awareness too narrowly.
Well, yeah, I hope so, because I would love to have that more total awareness. I mean, it's wonderful.
So when you're focusing on something, you're also aware of what the rest is in the field that you're not focusing on. Maybe arguably less aware, or it's less obviously in focus, or less detailed, or less coming up sharp.
Yeah.
So you're thinking, so that maybe you're really obsessed and lost in a train of thought and all heated up about it, who knows, right? And that's happening. So that's the focus of your attention, of your awareness. But that focus is a continuum with the field that it's in, and the field is other than the focus.
Yeah.
And the field doesn't go away just because the focus is there.
Yeah, and that's actually even a better way of describing it. I mean, I'm sort of moving along the continuum. I'm widening the...
Yeah. But you're not actually widening anything, because you always are aware of the full field, even if you're claiming that you're aware of what you're focused on.
Right.
Because the field doesn't go away just because there's a focus in it. There's a spontaneous tendency for a focus to arise within any field, always. Naturally, it's the nature, it's the way consciousness works. Any field of any and all fields of experience, there will be a tendency to settle on something and try and bring it into a sharper focus in the context of the rest of the field, which correspondingly resolves into less focus, and so on and so forth. And exactly what that mechanism is and how it works is bizarre and undescribable. But when something is in focus, it actually doesn't get any sharper, even though it seems to. When something's in the field out of focus, it actually isn't any less present, even though it may seem to. So again, we kind of hypnotize ourselves that we're only aware of what is in the field of our focus, but it's a lie. It's just not true. You're aware of the full field of experience all the time. And in that awareness, you are aware of non-thought, even if you're lost in thought.
Yeah.
Because thought occurs in a context of non-thought. When thought's occurring, it doesn't stop vision and sound, and the universe doesn't disappear and there's just the thought sitting there. It doesn't happen, does it? So your field of experience is actually there, even if you're relatively obsessed or focused in, zoomed in on the thought.
Yeah, so I guess it's just it could be more of a sense than preference or enjoyment. I mean, or circumstance. But I mean, sometimes if I was a horse and had to wear blinkers, to run the race, it might be more fun to have the blinkers off, running around in a field or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's just maybe it's more of a preference that I'm talking about.
Yeah, but that's fine. But if you have that preference, you can exercise it because again, the field is always present.
Yeah.
So you don't need to cut yourself off from it because you aren't actually cut off from it. It's just a matter of noticing that fact.
Yeah.
And so in that simple noticing, you're not actually changing anything. You're not actually creating an expanded awareness. The expanded awareness is already there. You're just letting yourself acknowledge it and access it.
Right, so the only thing that's changing is the notice or taking the blinkers off.
Yeah.
Simple things.
Yeah.
So with focus, I've always thought, or not always, but in the past, at least in the past, that focus was the only thing I have to give. And I don't know whether that's, because like right now, I'm focused on you. I'm focused, my attention is focused in this room. I know that at the same time, I have an awareness that all this is happening, and I'll go with choice again, and my focus, for whatever reason, is on you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I guess I wanted you to almost describe the nature of that. It was interesting when you were just like, the focus has a tendency to do this. I was kind of just looking at the tendency in human interaction to focus.
Yeah, well, it's simpler than, or more fundamental than human interaction. The focus of attention is always dancing around like a bumblebee. Like in the visual field, if you notice what your awareness is lighting on, it's absolute instability. It's very, very, very rare for you to actually have something that's staying within the field. Your focus is dancing around. Even if you're looking at someone's face, you look at this and that. You're dancing around, and you walk into a room, you see this, you see that, you see that. You may not consciously be aware that you're doing that, but in actual fact, you are. And within all the different fields of experience, thought and sound and hearing and touch and all those other things, similar considerations apply. The focus of awareness is always dancing around like a firefly, very dynamically. And the focus of attention is part of experience, obviously, but it's not is a particularly important part. It's not as important as we may think it is.
I find that it's, if you think about like people who choose to watch TV or not watch TV, or to watch good things on TV or bad things, or watch the news, it seems like a lot of importance is given to that.
It's just people gravitate to their natural mode in terms of their particular unfoldment. They gravitate to where they need to be for who they are, so to speak, for the kinds of things they're dealing with. And everyone is unique, so you can't compare people. You can't say, everyone should be like this, because it's not like that. Everyone has to be right where they are, and they can't be where someone else is. And to think that they ought to be, or even it would be a good thing or an advantage for them if they were, is just a fallacy.
So is it? So when I said the statement, I just want to make sure that I shouldn't say it anymore. Is it my focus of attention is the only thing I have to give to you? That's not true.
No, of course not. You actually have nothing to give to me.
Yeah.
Your value is your presence, your being, and that fills the full field of your experience. It's profoundly valuable. It's you being you is what you have to give, and you can't not give it. It's intrinsic, and it's doing itself. So it's not something you need to aspire to or try to do or whatever. And yet, aspiration and all of that may seem to be occurring within your experience, and that's all fine too, because that may be part of its process, its parent process.
But am I really giving or is this being giving if like
while you were talking to me, for example, I'm just over here eating food, I'm looking out the window, I'm not.
But that's your, if you are that, that's your genuineness to be that, and your genuineness is all you have to give. You can't give what you think you ought to be. You can only give what you are. And what you are is self-fulfilling.
Right.
So yeah, if you're over there, then that's what you're giving. You're giving you being in that mode, which is your genuine, honest, native mode. As it's showing up, let's say, in that instant. And there's not necessarily any stability in that. I mean, who knows? Again, you can't get a handle on any of this stuff. So it's, there's not really any point in trying to pin it down too finely.
And that goes back to what you shared with me the other night, where you said, then I will start to attract people who resonate more to that authentic expression, or genuine expression or not.
Sure. The more nakedly you are yourself, the more people you will tend to alienate people that who are alienated by that, and you will tend to attract people who resonate with that naturally. So the more you're in disguise you are, the less people will position themselves authentically with regards to you. But you can't ever be totally in disguise. Most people can anyway.
It's kind of like the focus.
You don't mean that specifically, right?
What's that?
That you can choose to be authentically yourself or not, whatever you're ever doing.
No, that's what I said.
Oh, okay. And that's not what I heard you say.
Oh.
That's not what it sounded like you said. And the more genuine you are, the more authentic you are when people respond to you authentically. You're always authentically yourself.
Right.
So.
But the more you are revealing or explicitly acting out your nature, the more you're...
But aren't you always?
Yes.
Okay. So how could it be more than...
I mean, explicit. It's not important. It's a conversation we had the other night. It was in a particular context. The other day.
Being specific about something, I get it.
You said something that I just realized I misinterpreted. You said that thought always happens in the context of non-thought. And I've always gone to some sort of metaphysical mental space that allows thought to be there because it needs space for the thought. I mean, I'm going to this mental gymnastics of going, there's a space here that thought can occur in. You're actually like seeing and hearing. I mean, it's very much more simple than what I was making it.
Sure.
And I'm wondering how much else I've misinterpreted.
I want to choose
I'm sure.
I'm scared right now.
Where do we start?
A lot.
There's a moral to that story. It's a very, very simple formula. Any interpretation is wrong interpretation. So that's very. So it's not. Don't worry about misinterpretation. That's small potatoes. Any interpretation is wrong interpretation.
Peter, where does unconscious belong in this picture? So
where does what?
Unconscious. We're experiencing, we're aware of the experience. What is unconscious?
There's no such thing.
Right.
There's various theories in psychology about this unconscious and the subconscious and all that, but they are they're inaccurate.
Do they make any sense to you?
To me, well, they make sense in their own terms. I see what they're trying to do. They're just wrong.
Mm-hmm.
They're wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's nothing but conscious.
Right.
So if
A great deal of our consciousness is very nonlinear and irrational and makes no sense and has a very strange degree of coherence, or you could say high degree of incoherence, relative to what we relate to normally is in psychological terms, pseudo-psychological terms, is the conscious mind, which is rational and makes sense, and where descriptions are possible, and logic is possible, and all that. And so the part of our mind that is logical and rational and conceptual has no way to deal with or access the part of our mind that is irrational, illogical, non-conceptual, and non-linear. And so if we're identifying with our conscious mind and our thinking mind, then we cut ourselves off from appreciating the fact that we are in fact experiencing and functioning within these other modes these other more non-linear modes all the time. And it's not that they're actually unconscious, it's that from the point of view of the conscious mind, i.e. the thinking mind, the conceptual mind, these vast modes of experience don't compute. They're you can't, it's like asking, well, what did you do after you went to sleep last night before you started dreaming? Well, you can't answer that question because it's nothing happened there that is accessible to the conscious mind. It's describable, that you could put words to. You see what I mean? That's rational. It's not that it was non-experience. On the contrary, it was total experience. But it was such a non-linear experience that it's not rememberable, describable, accessible at all to the conscious mind. And likewise, in real time, all the time, we're having all sorts of very non-linear, sort of relatively chaotic or incoherent experience, or modes of experience. And they're happening in our consciousness. We are conscious of them. But the conscious mind can't access that. But we are not the conscious mind. We are the consciousness itself. We are being itself. So what we truly are is with all of it. Can be with the conscious mind, so-called, can be with the unconscious mind, so-called, and all of that, because the division is arbitrary. It's more a matter of degrees of coherence in terms of logic.
Mm-hmm. So, say people who are in psychoanalysis, when they make some progresses and bring some unconscious into conscious, what does it mean in your terms? Like they start understanding why they perceive certain things before they didn't have any clue why that happened, why their reaction to a certain person, a certain event, or certain spell, whatever it was, what it was.
It's very partial. The true power in effective psychotherapy has nothing to do with the conscious mind. It has to do with orienting to the actual energy presence of experience, like we were talking about earlier with spirituality, with being less reactive to events and all that. That has nothing to do with bringing anything into the conscious mind. But it's a direct reorientation in the unconscious, so-called, which is doable. And the same thing, effective psychotherapy effectively does the same thing. There may or may not be, I remember this, I remember my mother beat me, or this or that or the other. But that's more of a side effect that if there's any actual value in psychotherapy, it occurs in actual events that occur in the subconscious, i.e. in the energy, you might say the subtle energy structure of embodiment. We don't have words for these things, so it's hard to talk about it. I mean, that's why it's held to be unconscious, because it's hard to talk about. But again, we participate in experience on those levels, so we have access to them, even though we can't talk about them very clearly. And anyway, it's just a way of describing things, so it's not particularly important. The important thing is what things are, not what we call them. And there, experience exists in consciousness, let's say, or as a function of consciousness. And experience is reality. The only reality that is findable whatsoever is the fact of experience. And everything anyone thinks they know about reality, they have abstracted from their experience. So experience is reality. Experience exists in consciousness. So if it's real, if it's actual, it exists in consciousness. So even if it's being qualified as unconscious in some sense, according to some schema, that's just a philosophy. That's not the actuality. Basically, being equals consciousness. So anything that actually exists, anything that's real, is an aspect or a function of consciousness.
The shift that I was talking about is not related to anything unconscious, like mentally or anything. But I had experiences in the past where I would realize some connections that brought me to react in certain ways, which was sort of getting in touch with something I didn't feel before, which is, you think it's not important. You know?
No, I think everything is important, but I think it does itself. I think it's important to experience this, but it's not important to make sense of it. Or to try and figure it out, because it can't be figured out, or it can't really make sense of it. I mean, we can have all sorts of elaborate theories about how things work and what's happening, but they're just theories. The important thing is the event itself. And the event itself is much more intimate and actual than any theoretical description of it.
But the event itself does bring something that happened to you before into your current experience.
Well, you can
right?
say that, and it can have all sorts of associations and symptoms and all that, but to separate these things out as if they were parts of it or separate events is just arbitrary. It makes you feel a different way, it makes you think different things, makes you remember different things. I mean, you could say all sorts of different sort of symptoms of any actual event, right? But, again, the event itself, it transcends, is much more than the sum of its parts, but especially the sum of its nameable parts. So it's not particularly important to deconstruct it or sort it out.
See, that feels a little related to during the break when part of why I asked you about trauma, because I thought just that you can't really describe what happened before. So it seems like a definition of it is impossible.
Peter, I was wondering if you'd talk a little bit about, when you talk about presence, I mean, it's sort of the way I take it. I mean, the way I experience is presence. Everything appearing is presence. It's in your face. It's, but at the same time, you can't really say what it is, even though it's completely obvious.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering. I mean, maybe that's not to say that. It just seems like I could oversimplify that pretty easily too.
You can oversimplify anything real easily.
Yeah.
But again, you don't. That's not a particularly useful way to deal with it. Except oversimplifying. What oversimplifying is really good for is to learn the valuelessness of oversimplifying. So you oversimplify until you finally get it through your thick head that you're shooting yourself in the foot by doing so, because you're cutting yourself off from an unestimable richness.
It seems the presence undermines oversimplifying automatically.
Yeah, of course, because presence is inclusive. Presence is not this is present and that's present, the other is present. Presence is, as soon as you touch presence, you see it's ubiquitous. The entirety of reality is present. And that fact of presence is profoundly inclusive. So you immediately transcend. When you really notice presence, when you really just feel presence, you immediately transcend all bullshit. You transcend all conceptual models of reality and holding the world to be this or that or the other. And it reveals, the actuality of actual transcendence becomes revealed very directly. So presence is a really good touchstone.
Why is it so easy to overshoot it? I mean,
because it's so detailed. It's so easy to go to the detail. It's present, and you're present. Oh, you're on the sofa. Oh, we're present Belvedere. Oh, this, that, the other. Specific. And all of those specifics are nothing other than presence. But as soon as you go to the detail, you start micromanaging and analyzing and conceptualizing and drawing a difference between this and that. the whole mechanism of samsara springs up instantaneously.
It's amazing, yeah, because it can be so shocking and sometimes it's so don't even notice it all the time.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing with noticing is it's effortless and easy and obvious, and it's so easy to not do, or let's say so easy to do badly. But it's actually easy to do well. Once you let yourself see how easy it is to do well, it's not hard. What makes it hard is we think it's hard. We think our incredibly effortful way of approaching our experience is easy, erroneously, and we think noticing and spirituality is hard. But in actuality, it's exactly the opposite. Noticing is the letting go. It could be easier than that. Spontaneity, let reality do itself, and the bubble pops, and that's noticing. Or no, this is what's happening here. Who am I? What am I doing here? Narration. You have to churn it out. You have to. It's effortful. You have to hold it together. You have to manufacture. You have to spell check it and check it for internal consistency and arguability and defensibility if someone criticizes you and all these other things. It's a whole lot of work. Whereas you just let go, reality's doing itself. You don't have to do any of that stuff. It's like, you want to criticize reality? I don't care. I don't need to defend it. I don't need to come up with strategies or arguments. And so all the internal dialogue just stops having a purpose or an orientation. It just becomes these effortless sort of little waftings of like northern lights going through the mind. Because you're not strategizing, because there's nothing to defend, there's nothing to maintain, there's nothing to pull together, there's nothing to make sense of. Delusion and realization happens right now. There's no momentum. Interpreting this, i.e., misinterpreting this, is done in real time, and just being with this without interpretation is done in real time. So spirituality is not a matter of momentum or karma or building up. I've got to develop my trust. I've got to spend more time on the cushion. I've got to this. I've got to that. It's like, no, just right now. You either let go, or you grab hold of your lies, of your claims, your self-importance, which you're bootstrapping into existence. I mean, it's just not there, unless you supply it. And when you supply it, it's right now. You stop supplying it right now. And that's realization. Just this simple fact that's doing itself.
Well, you said it is cumulative.
Sorry?
You have said it's cumulative, though. Cumulative.
Well, it seems to be cumulative, but it isn't actually. Yeah, I noticed that. The more I notice, the more I notice. I mean, it's easier to. Yeah, that's the cumulative part. Right. Yeah. But since there's no time, that's not actually the case. Yeah. Noticing is always right now, and ignorance is always right now. So in that sense, it's not cumulative. So thinking of it as cumulative and historic, it's possible to think of it that way, but only when you're interpreting. And noticing, there's no cumulativeness whatsoever. Noticing is
But reality trumps unreality all the time.
Sure does.
So that it tends to radiate more than the interpretive.
I don't know if I'd say radiate more, but
Well,
I know what you're saying.
or like you say, like I noticed the ant in Washington, all of a sudden in reality again, whereas or it will permeate other things.
sure.
But maybe ignorance does that too. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Well, thinking in terms of permeation and all that is over-analyzing it. I mean, all those metaphors. The problem is a lot of the way we communicate this or look at this is in terms of these metaphors, and it's important to remember the metaphors are not accurate. They're evocative. They're like magic. They're like poetry. They're evocative, hopefully, but they aren't the thing itself. So. Don't cling to the metaphors. Go to the actuality, which is just this presence right here. And it's not like anything, and we could talk about all sorts of things it's like, but in the end, that's not actually true. But this is true, and you have that. It's right here. It never goes away. So, end of story.
Do we have to check our cars?
4.
I think we're good. We're good through 4, and 4 is quitting time, so we're basically good for the whole.
Oh, it's not a 2-hour thing? We don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, it's 2 hours.
2 hours.
But someone went out and checked it too, so that means we're good till. And both sides of the street were checked
Oh, they checked it too for what?
at 2 o'clock. Who was it went out at 2 o'clock?
10 minutes.
10 minutes of 2. Oh, yeah. Oh, 10 minutes of 2.
You check and what does that mean? But if they
No
want-
chalk mark.
No chalk marks.
No chalk-
Oh, no chalk marks. I didn't realize you didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Thoroughly checked.
Thoroughly?
Many
Did.
cars.
Many cars. On both sides.
On both sides.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're good until 10 to 4.
All right. Excellent.
Till what time do they keep chalking and how long? Till 6 or not? All night?
Well, St. Patrick's Day, maybe they took off. Probably off drinking beer at the pub.
That's right.
Yeah, there's the pub.
Hopefully.
What a good idea.
They like that.
I say.
Want a beer, Peter?
Oh, I love it.
She's got gluten-free beer.
Thank you so much.
Gluten-free.
So Peter, it seems like what we're talking about here and the language we use and the concepts and the metaphors has so little to do with what we're talking about. It's such a
Yes.
detached thing from the thing that we're trying to, and we cannot even touch it.
Yes.
No.
Using the things that we're using, sitting
Yes.
here and talking.
Yeah, my
Yes.
question is every time.
Exactly. Yes. That's how it is. Because what's happening here is inconceivable, is impossible, makes no sense, and it cannot be talked about, cannot be accurately deconstructed, cannot be analyzed, cannot be clearly described.
So your teaching happens like this. We all come here and we try to express the only way we know whatever we think about it. And you tell each of us that it's pure nonsense. And that's what you do every time.
Yes, but it's not necessarily that simple. Because
of course you say that.
Because
you don't charge anyway. So.
No. The price is right. because talking isn't the only thing that happens here. Talking is a very small part of what happens here, and it's not an insignificant part, but it's not a particularly big part of what happens here. And somehow, mysteriously, the whole gestalt of what happens here
works.
It seems to do something sometimes, or not.
It's communication,
And that's
not verbal.
and again, since we can't make sense of it, there's not really much point trying to say much more about it than that. But it seems to be an actuality. It seems to be something that is possible for one to find valuable, and even though it makes no sense what it is or how it happens, that fact makes it worth doing for some people, and that's why most people are here, I suppose. That's why I'm here.
I mean, there is good chai, so.
And the
chai.
food rocks.
There's good food.
That's try and
Price is right.
Price is right. Talk is cheap.
You get to hang out with fellow nonconformists.
We get to experience the view.
Yeah, oh my God. My focus has been there. I like it here.
But just remembering that fact alone is enormously powerful. Is that spirituality is inconceivable; it makes no sense, but it's real, and so thinking about it and talking about it and trying to figure it out and even asking questions and all that is really, not particularly relevant or important. I'm not arguing against doing that. I'm just pointing that out, and reflecting on that can be very powerful. I mean, the spirituality is its own ultimate koan. It's like, what is it what is this? What is it that's happening here? And I mean, I mean what's happening here in the big sense, but also here in the small sense, here in any sense. That's a koan right there. Just be with that. Just be with that question, and you'll get some mileage out of it. It's very strange.
For me, it's like I experience it just like you, like maybe the taste of that beer. I like the food from my intellect or something. Mm-hmm. It's like I enjoy it. It's sort of bouncing me back and forth, figuring it out. Even though I'm not figuring out everything, I keep going back to it. You can't articulate it.
It's 5:03. How about a 5-minute break, and then we'll do our last hour. Does that sound good?
Is there a time?
Okay.
That was really nice.
Welcome back.
I'm a
Marty's
Well, it didn't seem to work, honey. Sorry.
You
We
try
tried.
enough?
Oh yeah, I guess so.
Peter, I am aware of a vastness that is present when I don't know what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that oscillates with then coming in and thinking about or exploring what could be happening, and then that's a reminder that we can't know what's happening, and it's this back and forth. And it reminds me of exactly what happens when I used to take drugs,
Mm-hmm.
where I would know something was coming on because all of a sudden I didn't know what was going on. So the worse it was when there was absolutely no knowledge of what was going on at all. But here, I feel that there's still a groundedness of knowing that you don't know what's going on. And I'm wondering if that is something that gets destroyed or shrinks, or I mean, it's like, okay, we don't know what this is, and yet you say we can know what this is.
Well, yeah, we can know what this is by by discovering what actual knowing is. You can't know what this is in any normal relational or conceptual or definitional sense. So that's the sense in which you can't know what this is, but you can know what this is in the sense of true knowing, which is ultimately being. You know it because you are it. And you know your being most profoundly, most intimately. Just like you know your experience most profoundly, most intimately. So you know what it is most profoundly when you stop thinking you need to know it as something. You need to know it as a definition or interpretation or, whatever. It's like mastery in any field. A person, well, you're an artist. A person that's a brilliant artist, it's a true master artist. They know art, not by being able to talk about it, but because they are one with it. They have an absolute intimate engagement with it, non-verbally, non-linearly, non-conceptually. Or the same with a, say, great musician or a dancer or anything. It's the same sort of a thing where they have transcended technique and method and process, and they simply are their field. And likewise, you are your field of experience already. You always have been. So it's even easier, arguably, than in the case of an artist or a dancer or a musician where something has to be developed. You simply realize the sufficiency of that, realize the sufficiency of your intrinsic knowing of your experience, and realize the profundity of that. That not because we have the fantasy, the delusive fantasy that something is gained by developing all these artful interpretations. And when we finally get that nothing is gained by that, on the contrary, we have the most profound fullness when we simply learn to appreciate the completeness of the already existing fact of our absolute intimacy with our experience, which can be said to be a knowing. It can be said to be you can't know what it is because you can't say. It depends on, again, words are imprecise. The thing itself is what's important, which is this fact of experience, and discovering that you are this experience, you always have been, and it itself is an astounding completeness and self-sufficiency and spontaneity and a fullness.
I've heard it said that the development of spiritual awareness is bringing this vastness to the focused relative activity, or having the two happen simultaneously.
But again, they already do. That's already the case. So it's just a matter of noticing that, coming to appreciate that.
So you're saying they are happening already simultaneously. What happens, at least in what I'm familiar with, is it's almost like there's various degrees of it, but it's almost like a shut-off valve. That as soon as the relative or focused awareness comes into play, this vastness, it's like it disappears.
Right.
Although it's there, obviously it's there, but the unconsciousness of it, or the lack of awareness of it in relation to this relative awareness, is obvious.
Yeah. But the process of coming to rest in this fullness completely consists, or often looks like, this kind of a bouncing back and forth between a more relative perspective and then a more absolute perspective. But in doing so, by making that transition over and over again, you learn something each time about the relative and about the absolute, and you discover the way in which they are absolutely the same, which of course is every way. but you get to that point. It's like learning something by being with it, by exposure, by examination, and you examine it closely and be with it closely over a prolonged period of time, and you really assimilate what it is. And likewise with this, we typically have a lot of exposure to a relative way of holding our experience, right, from a lifelong history, but we've been doing it only within the context of that frame of reference, and rather than looking at it from the outside, so to speak, or from a context where we can see it more critically or less credulously, let's say. And also, even though we've always had an awareness of the let's call it the openness, we likewise have not been particularly conscious of it or aware of it with precision, with let's say more being with it in the capacity of examining what it actually is. And so by moving back and forth between these two conditions, you're learning about both of them, and ultimately you will learn that they are both the same thing, because you'll see how they work, you'll see where they are, you'll see what they're made of, you'll see what their genesis is, and so on, and which turns out to be one and the same. And as this integration occurs, you will relax into that sameness and just notice that it's where you always have been.
Not as a conceptual awareness. I mean, it's like I can see relatively what's here.
Right.
The openness of it is seeing it from it's like a cognitive context.
Uh-huh.
So it's the cognitive context that makes it seem as if they are the same, the
Right.
relative and the absolute.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Well,
Or is it more
it's simpler than that, and you can't really deconstruct it. It's that the conceptual world exists in the context of a vast inconceivability, and is an expression of it, and is one with it intrinsically. The vast inconceivability is actuality, and the conceptual world is an artifact of that. Just like the same way that a hand is an expression of your body, but your body is the whole system, and the hand is an outgrowth of it, or a subsystem of it. Likewise, the conceptual world and the world of rational thought and so on is a subsystem which exists within and is an expression of this vast openness, let's call it, whatever, actuality. And you are actually that vast system, and what's more is those two systems are not mutually exclusive. You don't need to be in one or in the other. And when it seems that you do, practically, in other words, when you sort of found yourself snapping back and forth between them or whatever, then you're not seeing intimately enough as it is the way in which they are one and the same. And as you come to discover that more profoundly, then there will seem to be less and less of a dichotomy, and you'll be able to move in and out of the conceptual world the same way you open or close your eyes. It won't seem like a major event or a big shift of perspective. And again, this is what's called a process that does itself intrinsically, that is part and parcel of the nature of unfoldment. But that process can look like a sort of a moving back and forth and all of that, which can be very disorienting. And it's easy to get misinterpretations of one thing as a goal and another thing as a problem, or various other things. But ultimately, it resolves itself intrinsically, so you don't need to worry about it. Just enjoy being a tennis ball.
Well, sometimes you call it the natural intelligence of the recognition of it being the same.
Sure. That sounds pretty articulate.
And I guess I'm just calling it a concept of that.
Concepts of it are fine, but concepts are not particularly powerful. Actualities are powerful. And actualities are not conceptual. I mean, concepts are actualities.
It's recognition of it, I guess.
Yeah.
It's more
Yeah, recognition is not conceptual.
more accurate.
Recognition is a matter of energy orientation, let's call it, to be metaphorical again. You've heard me say, sometimes I use the phrase of where you hold yourself in your energy. And that's another way of trying to indicate what this is about. You learn to hold yourself, it's like, say where your center of gravity is in your energy, let's say. And again, I realize this is very imprecise. But your center of gravity feels like it's a certain place in your energy. And what this is all about, what this process is all about, is having that center of gravity shift to where it actually is.
Which is focused on.
Which is not conceptual.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's an actual event. It's an experiential event that is wholly actual and not an idea, and undeniable and self-verifying.
And inexplicable.
Absolutely.
But knowable.
Well, of course.
But knowable. Knowable.
Beable.
Rabble
Isn't that
rouser.
interesting?
Yes.
How about? Go ahead. You finish.
Well, about what that is, I mean, that's what we're really all interested in.
Yeah. Me too.
That's why we're here. That's all he's interested in, for sure.
Has to do with a sense of, or a actuality of identity.
Yes, in a profound sense it does.
And I guess it's more here, it's more the space rather than the viewpoint or the perspective.
You could say that. It's discovering that the true viewpoint and perspective is the space. It's discovering what's seeing your experience right now. What's seeing your experience is the space that it's in. And so that is the true viewpoint and perspective. And when you discover that, then when you think I, or when you feel I, you feel the space. You don't feel a body or a localization or behind your eyes or something like that. Not that it excludes that, because all of that, of course, comes with. But you discover your true embodiment, which happens to be outside space and time. So it can be a little disorienting when you're used to relating to things in terms of space and time, which is part of the the disjunction and the confusion and the whole thing.
Well, isn't it like just accepting that what we normally describe as the experience of space is actually not space?
Yeah, exactly so. Yeah, it's discovering the true space would be another way to put it. The actuality of space.
Yeah.
Which is essentially non-spatial and not in space. But space is in it. And you are that.
So if I could belabor that,
If you could flog that dead horse.
Yes.
Okay, it's dying.
Not dead yet.
Panting, but there still are signs of life.
this is what I find happens. Like as soon as you said that, that opened up a space, which is not space, but within space.
Right.
But it's like hearing that. What is like a conceptual or involves the intellect or whatever it is.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
and then creates that.
Right.
And then I notice that, it's like every time you say something, it's the hearing of that and the words, and then the clicking with that opens that up.
Right.
And then I'm off in my other little thing, and then it's open and then
Right. Okay.
So,
But look, okay, here's a trick. Next time that happens and you go off in your own little thing, when the concepts start coming up, see what that's it. Where's that happening?
well, I'm talking about the process. That's another one of those process things.
I understand.
Seeing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually used in your mind.
Yeah.
And
But don't worry about whether or not it's using your mind, because mind isn't really mind.
right.
So mind doesn't exclude non-mind, because mind is not really mind. Mind is actually non-mind. So it's not like there's a mind-non-mind dichotomy that is important. And oh my God, I'm in mind. I better shut it down. It's not like that. Mind is just a tip of the iceberg. Mind is like the shadow of non-mind. So they're not exclusive. On the contrary, they generate each other. They're one system. So non-conceptual hyper-intelligence is the context of little thinking conceptual mind. And they permeate each other, so that there's no dichotomy there, there's no exclusivity. In other words, being with concepts doesn't actually shut down transcendent intelligence, because they coexist. You've heard me say probably many times the phrase that thought occurs in the context of non-thought, and that's what I'm referring to. Another way to look at it is there's nothing but mind. But mind isn't limited to thinking mind or conceptual mind.
There's nothing but mind.
Sure, nothing but mind. This is your mind right here.
Peter, I think, as I said, we all try to define something with words, and you tell us that that is not really describing what it is. I think you're not just doing that. Once in a while would agree with us to make it more interesting and confuse us, so that it's all off altogether. You agree with something, and as soon as we sort of start relating to that, you throw that thing off as well, which is probably a more powerful way to deny anything being definable with words and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Nice observation.
Does it all the time.
Because just denying that what we say is true wouldn't be interesting, right?
It's not very. It's not as effective.
Yeah, isn't right? Yeah.
You see, when the thing is, when someone holds this and to be in a certain way, just saying it's not that way is not powerful. You have to see the way in which it is that way, and then from that perspective, see the way in which it isn't.
Right.
If you knock it down from outside, it's not powerful. If you knock it down from inside, it's much more powerful.
Yeah. I have a friend who argues in the following fashion. As soon as you start agreeing with him, he takes the opposite position. So it just never ends.
I know someone like that too quite well.
I know someone like that. It's very entertaining at our house.
I'm sure.
No, it isn't.
Knock it down from within.
That's right.
Right.
Got it. That's the thing.
Isn't that a definition of relationship?
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
You're right.
Beth? What say
Yes,
you?
dear. Yes, dear.
So I noticed with seeing that you were talking about, like, if you're in a staring at a white wall, all things can start like wildly spontaneous showing up. That kind of seeing kind of carries over that it's like looking at the rug or the corduroy against the rug, and the patterns are flashing, everything's flashing.
Yeah.
And after images, go on to other images, and then it starts flashing. And which is a fun parlor kind of game. I'm wondering. I mean, it seems more real. I mean, what's more real going on rather than things having kind of a solid identity, I guess.
Well, it's a matter of noticing the way experience actually works, in fact, rather than the way we're used to thinking of it. You may be used to thinking of things as inert and static and just kind of sitting there and not really changing very much at all.
Yeah.
But in fact, if you look at your experience, you'll notice it's profoundly dynamic, and in actuality has no stability whatsoever. And that's a fact. It's just simply a fact. And so noticing that fact is moving from, if you're holding it to be static, moving from something that's not true, that you're holding to be true, into something that is actual, which is a more powerful framework, a more powerful position to be in terms of, okay, now that I'm here and I'm in this absolute dynamism with basically no consistency whatsoever, or whatever consistency seems to be there is interestingly present in the face of absolute inconsistency. So okay, if I'm here, if I'm in that, then what? And then you start moving from there, rather than moving from, everything is just sort of sitting here inertly, statically, without any change or vitality, and you're in a world of liveliness, you're in a world of vitality, you're in a world of dynamism, you're in a world of spontaneity. And, so great, so what's next? It's like, cool, what's next?
Yeah.
So again, it's a matter of moving into actuality, move away from orienting to your experience in terms that are not actually experientially, self-evidently true, towards relating to your experience in ways that are experientially self-evidently true. And you'll move into spontaneity, you'll move into unconstancy, you'll move into vitality, you'll move into intelligence, you'll move into meaningfulness, you'll move into nonlinearity, you'll move into all sorts of arguable qualities that are present and that are powerful, and then you can sort of feel, well, okay, what's the world feel like now? And where am I? What am I? What's going on here? What are our circumstances? What is happening? And you're all of a sudden you're with that in a new context that may have implications and suggestions that you can then explore. I mean, but noticing is all about noticing what experience actually is, as opposed to what we hold it to be. It's really very simple. There's no magic trick to it. It's just a matter of getting real. It's like, well, okay, here's experience. What is it actually? How does it work? What does it actually show up as? In what way, in what manner, in what modes does it actually seem to show up as? That's all. Just getting real, getting empirical. This is all just about empiricism. Throw theory out the window and just be with what is actually here, the way that it is actually here, and see what that implies. And it turns out to have a lot of implications that are drastically different than most of the sort of normal consensus worldviews that people seem to tout. The most esoteric answers to the highest spiritual questions really boil down to what is this? What's going on here? And it's not hidden. It's not concealed. So, you can derive for yourself, starting from absolute nothing, with no basis whatsoever, you can derive the highest spiritual truth just by observing, by being an objective, unbiased observer of experience. Because it's all right here. It's not hidden. It's not concealed. Everything is here.
Peter, did you ever have a teacher after Pinot?
No.
Just read a lot of books.
I've read a lot of books. It wasn't, in that case, it wasn't so much teaching as it was familiarizing myself with different ways of putting this, with sort of other people's approaches to the same thing. Because this itself is virtually inexpressible. So it's a fascinating challenge for someone.
How to teach it?
Yeah, for someone who's inclined to be interested in looking at it various ways, the ways that historically other people have done so. And it's astounding the incredible variety and divergence of the way different people have.
How often that is misinterpreted.
But, again, it's not misinterpreted so much, because any interpretation is a misinterpretation. It's a matter of how artful or how useful a misinterpretation is. So, anyway. Again, teachers aren't important. The important thing is to see this. This is the teacher. All a good teacher does is steer you towards your own experience, and your experience is the master. You don't get anything from outside yourself. It's the discovery. It's from many traditions it's called self-realization, self-knowledge, self-discovery, and this is ultimately true. It's just about just finding out what you actually are and have always been. And it's not what you've always thought.
Like Guru, gee, you are you.
Yeah, sure. All this fixation on teachers is all very silly.
you talk some about energy or energetic participation? Like, and then you just said, so you're just here, noticing what's here.
Mm-hmm.
So, did you perceive, like that, that this might be, it's a different density of energy, or this is wood from a tree, that's rock from a mine, cotton from, I mean, that's the definitions, but that it's
all of that.
It's all different densities of
Sure.
energy.
Yeah, there's nothing but densities of energy. That's all that is present here.
Okay.
Densities, frequencies. I mean, there's various different ways to put it. None of them are literally true, but they're useful ways of
and origins
seeing what this is. Well, it's all part and parcel. It's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the qualities of energy are very clearly revealed experientially. The experience of a piece of metal is very different than the experience of a flower. The experience of one piece of metal is very different than the experience of another piece of metal. Whether you're seeing it or touching it or licking it or whatever, doesn't matter. So experience reveals the variations in energy directly. That's what experience is different energies, different textures of energy. I like to use the word texture because it applies across the board to all different sorts of qualities, rather than density or frequency or anything like that. Whereas texture sort of includes all of that. Experience just as this vast spectrum of textures that are completely self-evident. You look at hair, you look at wood, you look at metal, you look at flesh. They're just so obviously different textures, textures of experience. Textures of, you can call them experiential energy or subtle energy. I mean, it doesn't matter what you call them. It's all just a lot of hot air anyway. It's the fact that matters, the thing itself, which is presence. The presence of these textures, textural presence, or I call it radiant presence. And that's what there is here. That's all that there is. Outside, inside, thought is that, sight is that. I mean, all experience is textual presence. It's that simple. And you get that it's all, even though the textures are infinitely varied in terms of their different portions of the spectrum and so on, you get that they're all essentially the same thing. It's just this one energy that has an infinite, virtually infinite range of textures.
And that is also, you see the sky and the ocean?
Everything. If it's experience, it is a textural presence. And nothing whatsoever is not experience.
It gets kind of interesting when you start experiencing it that way.
Yeah.
That you think about it, like if you look even at wood and cotton, and here it serves a light, and there it serves to support you in
Sure.
the chair.
Yeah. All of that. I mean, it's all intrinsic. And if you look, it's totally available. That's what your experience is. It's not like this is even esoteric, or it's just completely obvious. Really, it's almost trivial. But it's a different, when you're with your experience as this infinite spectrum of textural presence. It's a different way of being with it than the normal sort of consensus reality modes. But it's a very simple and direct and accessible way, so you can be with these things as they are experientially without having to go through a lot of conceptual classification first.
You just kind of let it go and describe it.
Yeah. Sure. And it doesn't exclude classification, but you don't have to use classification as a medium, as a midpoint to get to things. You know, you can classify if you want, but there's always direct experience, which is outside the realm of any classification or not. The direct experience is what it is, whether it's being classified or not, and however it's being classified. And that's the point: is to let experience show you what it is, rather than telling it what you think it is. And experience is doing nothing but. Experience is nakedly shining forth as it is. It's not hidden at all. It's not concealed. It's not duplicitous, except in the ways in which it is intrinsically duplicitous, or could be said to be such. But it's not. But it's not really being duplicitous. It's just weird. It's just nonlinear.
Curious, I find much the way was describing that, we say something and then we tell us it's nonsense. That the more I experience some of this, it's like it makes, I see everything as textures, and then there's no good and there's no bad, and wrong to it, and then it's like makes everything so meaningless. Like the job I've done or whatever it is, it's just like.
It's not meaningless, it's just meaningless in human terms. But human terms are like the rules to Monopoly. There's nothing intrinsically good about passing go and collecting $200. It's just the rule says it's good. And experience is like that. Humans value and assess experience according to a very, very intricate set of rules. Basically, that are just that are arbitrarily defined into existence. Just like, let's make up a game. What should the rules be? I don't know. Let's make the first rule that you have to wear a pink hat. Okay, pink hat. It's like, but reality isn't like that. Reality has its own intrinsic value. It's all profoundly meaningful and valuable, but not in human terms.
Right.
And the terms in which it's valuable are very non-linear, very inhuman terms of richness, of fullness, of contrast. It's like a symphony. Reality is meaningful in the way a symphony is meaningful. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't conform to some narration. It doesn't win or lose. It's not good or bad, but it's luscious. It's rich. It's profound.
So it's even in like your watch here, the cars on this thing create pollution versus this, so it's not different.
No, of course not. Pollution is just another texture.
It's just another texture.
Yeah.
That's what I was afraid you'd say. But I knew it was true.
It's not meaningless. It's like
no,
if you detach yourself, you can see things as more colorful, more vivid.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that itself is meaningful.
Look at this as pollution, you will not see the beauty of it.
Yeah.
In a sense.
No, yeah, that's.
I'm simplifying it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah. You could say beauty is meaningfulness.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that's not beautiful if you are with it as it actually is. All experience is intrinsically beautiful, is intrinsically luscious, is intrinsically astounding.
It's not empty, it's full, in a sense. It's very full, as full as can be. as soon as you let go. Those concept patterns, which is very hard to do for us.
It's like saying the whole world we've constructed in human terms is ridiculous.
It's not really constructed, it's just asserted.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing been constructed. There is no human world. There's just the real world. You know, there never was a human world, and yet humans are going around insisting that there is. What other life form gives a shit about the human world? And human definitions and human values.
Maybe dogs.
Cattle.
Maybe dogs.
That could be dogs. Dogs and cats. No, not cats. Definitely not cats.
Not cats.
Chicken,
Definitely
pigs,
not
and
cats.
cows. About to be killed.
It's also when you say we, it's as if we could get together again and cross this out, but it's not we, you know?
There's no we.
There's no we that can get back together and look at it again and see where we were wrong and say we were wrong. There is no reversing that. You're on your own in a way, I think.
Yeah, and fundamentally, there's no consensus. There's the assertion of consensus because people use the same words, but everyone means something subtly or grossly different by the same words.
Yep.
So you get together with your buddies, and those Republicans suck, or this or that, or whatever. And it seems like there's agreement, but there isn't actually, because what each individual means by that is entirely different, entirely unique. We're each a majority of one.
That was a bad example.
Well, those Democrats are just a bunch of wimps, you know. They're just big government, and they want to take more money from us.
Like the government, right? Where our culture is at fault, right? That we think this way. But it's being.
There's no consensus. There is no we. The we is really a very empty assertion, because everyone has their own view of things, and everyone's absolutely unique. Everyone's a one-off. There's no one like you. There's no one thinks like you. There's no one that agrees with you completely if they knew what you actually thought or felt. But we use the same words, and so if someone else is using the same words, we can pretend we agree, even though what they actually mean by those words diverges fundamentally from what you mean by those words. But it's difficult to discover that because we're throwing the same words at each other.
I work in the field of sustainability, and that's very much like that.
Yeah, of course.
Nobody can. And then when we even joke about that, we're like, nobody knows what that means.
Of course. But this is just the fact in all human culture. All sort of human tribes are bonded together by their apparent agreement and their apparent conformity. But the operative word is apparent, because there's no agreement. Everyone's a one-off. If you don't sufficiently disagree explicitly enough to get called on it, then you can be held to be included in a particular group. If you don't piss enough people off.
I don't have a problem with that.
That lets me out. I piss people off all the time.
Me too. That's a modus operandi here.
Certainly don't do it perfect. Just the way it comes out.
I find that people piss me off.
That's the way it comes out, right? Yes. Yes.
Well, we have about 5 minutes. Anything that hasn't been touched on that that's burning in anyone's mind, that would be the time to touch on it.
Also, don't forget to put $5 in this.
Oh yes, please, yes, if you would be so kind to donate to help support expenses.
So I was thinking about power, Peter, quite a bit today.
Uh-huh.
And presence being powerful.
Absolutely.
And then how that there's no intrinsic value in anything being powerful, but it is a tangible experience.
Yeah, power is more more of a pragmatic observation than it is a value.
More of an energetic experience of power in the sense that when we are in the middle of that presence, in a more kind of that there is a tangible sort of I suppose power is a word that I...
Yeah. Well, a good way to define power in this context is effectiveness.
Mm.
So, what is effective has power.
Mm-hmm.
And of course what is effective is useful
mm-hmm.
in terms of whatever you want to affect.
Yes.
So in that case, orienting towards power vis-a-vis what you're oriented towards is strategic.
So it's sort of a pointer in a way.
Yeah, it's a pointer and a jumping off point. Mm-hmm. It's a power point for navigation.
Mm-hmm. Because energetically and spiritually, maybe there is a draw toward power. For me, it's sort of like a gauge as to which path where I am on the path.
Yeah, because power is freedom. Power is liberation, ultimately. In any context, power is less encumberment, and which feels good.
Mm.
It feels liberating. It feels opening. So.
It's sort of the choiceless choice, in a way. In contrast to concepts and ideas and things we've talked about.
Yeah, and it's choiceless in the sense that power is unbiased except in its own intrinsic direction. So power is like money in the bank. How you spend it depends on how it's spendable. But it's a potentiality that can affect, that can have an effect.
Mm-hmm.
And so the greater the power, the greater the potentiality for effectiveness. In terms of yoga, in terms of spiritual unfoldment, noticing whatever, then finding aspects in your experience that have more power, you're in touch with aspects of your experience that can affect noticing in the yoga more powerfully and become spiritually transformative or opening or liberating more effectively, more directly.
I have a question for you. Why don't you charge money for this?
I don't believe in it, and I unfortunately I don't need to.
You don't need to. When you say you don't believe in it, because my experience of it is, again, it's an energy, an exchange of energy. Your presence is a gift,
Well, my presence is a gift, and it wouldn't be a gift if I was charging money for it.
Yeah, you got the point.
That enables your presence to be a gift too.
Right.
So no one has anyone up on anyone else. No one owes anyone anything, and there's no subtle seduction to be mercantile or to, expand the crowds or anything like that, which might enter the situation if there was a money or profit motive.
I never thought of charging for myself to come to these things.
Yeah,
I don't know why not. You're missing an opportunity. On the other hand, you might not make a lot of money. I want $500 an appearance. I'm available. Here's my shingle. I haven't had any takers yet, but could happen.
I don't think it could have made a difference, though. Well, we've kicked several people out for not bringing good food.
Right.
Something that's a source of
Letters.
That's
Yeah.
right.
It doesn't happen in
Very sore topic.
I mean, I appreciate the communion.
Do you believe in anything?
Me?
Hmm.
No.
Something like that.
So you don't believe in not charging you?
No. It's just
He's
strategic.
lucky. Yeah, you're just lucky you don't have to.
Yeah,
I mean, somebody who had to, it's not like they have a choice about that.
Well, you can always pump gas.
Yeah.
Go down to the corner and have Adyashanti fill up your gas tank. Check the oil too, please, buddy.
And wash the windows.
Used to be able to pump gas.
Anyway, good afternoon online.